The first thing I heard was my own name, soft, careful, like it might break something if said too loudly. "By Friday," Soraya whispered, "your mother won't be legally allowed to touch her own money." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I sat there in the dark guest room, staring at the faint line of light under the door, and listened to my own life being quietly taken apart. "Hi, it's Grace." When someone starts whispering about you at 2 a.m., you don't interrupt. You listen. "Tell me, would you have stayed in that bed or walked straight into that kitchen?" I'm Marlo Brindle. I'm 68 years old, and that night I learned exactly how much my son thought I was worth. The house was quiet in that polished, staged way Soraya liked. Everything in its place, everything just a little too perfect to feel lived in. I had gone to bed early after dinner, more out of habit than fatigue. Keaton insisted I stay the night. "Road's slick," he said. "Bridge lights are out again." He even brought me a blanket, tucked it over my legs like I was something fragile he might accidentally drop. That should have been my first clue. Soraya made me something she called lavender cocoa. Too sweet, faintly bitter underneath. I only drank half. I remember setting the mug on the nightstand and thinking it tasted like something that wanted to be calming but wasn't. Still, I smiled, thanked her, played the part I'd been playing for years. The agreeable mother, the one who didn't ask too many questions. At some point, I must have dozed off. But then I woke. No noise at first, just that strange feeling that something in the house had shifted. Then came the low murmur of voices from the kitchen downstairs. Not arguing, not laughing, controlled. I sat up slowly, letting the blanket fall. My joints protested, but I ignored them. I've learned over time that discomfort is often just background noise to something more important. "We can't wait any longer," Soraya was saying. Her voice had that smooth edge she used when she was negotiating a sale, the one that made people feel like they were agreeing with her idea even when they weren't. "Bluefin won't hold the offer forever." Keaton's voice came next. Tired, tight. "I know, I don't want to rush it and mess something up." "You won't mess it up," she said quickly. "We've already laid the groundwork, the memory gaps, the confusion. She's practically handing it to us." I felt something in my chest go very still. Memory gaps, confusion. I swung my legs off the bed and stood, careful to avoid the loose floorboard near the dresser. Old habits. When you've spent decades listening for nuance in courtrooms, you learn how to move without announcing yourself. The hallway outside the guest room was dark. A thin strip of light spilled up from the kitchen, stretching across the floor like a warning. I didn't step into it. I stayed just before the edge, where shadow held me in place, and leaned slightly toward the stairwell. "Dr. Noor just needs to see her once," Soraya continued. "That's it. One appointment, one letter, and we're done. Capacity evaluation, temporary guardianship, clean and simple." "And if she refuses?" Keaton asked. A pause. Then, softer, colder. "She won't refuse if she doesn't understand what she's signing." I closed my eyes for a moment, just long enough to steady my breathing. When I opened them again, everything felt sharper, edges clearer, like the room had been adjusted into focus. They weren't talking about helping me. They were talking about replacing me. I went back into the guest room without a sound and closed the door just enough to keep the light from spilling in. My bag was still on the chair where I'd left it. I reached inside and pulled out the small notebook I carried everywhere. Cream pages. Faint lines. A relic from a life where every word mattered. I sat on the edge of the bed, pen poised, and began to write. Not summaries, not impressions, words, exact words. Fernwick House has an opening, Soraya said downstairs. Private room, low cost. Once everything's transferred, we move her there quietly. It'll look like concern, not control. Keaton exhaled. I could almost see him running his hands through his hair the way he used to as a boy when he was caught between wanting something and knowing it might cost him. She's going to hate me. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Soraya again, almost gentle. Only if she understands what happened. I wrote that down too. My hand didn't shake. That surprised me more than anything else. For years I had ignored the small things. The way my keys would end up in different places than I remembered. The time my bank password stopped working until Keaton reset it for me. The quiet jokes about how I mix things up sometimes. I told myself it was age, that I was being sensitive, that families go through phases. But sitting there in the dark, listening to my son and his wife discuss the dismantling of my life like it was a renovation project, I understood something I should have seen months ago. This wasn't happening to me. This was being done to me. The conversation went on. Details, names, dates. A man named Drex, who would handle the paperwork. Something about a developer, Calder Spross, and a parcel of land behind my house that had suddenly become very important. I wrote it all down, line after line, my handwriting tightening as the pieces fell into place. 2 hours. That's how long I sat there. 2 hours of quiet, deliberate listening. 2 hours of my son explaining exactly how he planned to take everything his father and I had built and turn it into something smaller, easier, more convenient for him. At some point, the voices stopped. A chair scraped. Footsteps moved across the kitchen tile, then faded. A door closed. Silence returned, thick and heavy. I didn't lie back down. I stayed sitting on the edge of the bed, notebook open in my lap, staring at the last sentence I'd written. Only if she understands what happened. I looked around the room, the carefully chosen decor, the neutral colors, the staged calm of a house that had never really been mine, and I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not yet. Clarity. By the time the first pale light of morning touched the window, I already knew what I was going to do. I would call my lawyer. I would call my bank. And I would call the police. Because if they had a plan for me, they had made one mistake. They assumed I wasn't listening. By the time the sun rose over Brindle House, nothing inside me felt uncertain anymore. Fear had burned off somewhere between 2 whispered sentences and the scrape of a chair in my son's kitchen. What remained was something colder, cleaner, like the edge of a blade that's been sharpened slowly over years. I drove home without turning on the radio. The road along the bay was still wet from the night rain, thin ribbons of fog lifting off the water. I passed the old bait shop, the crooked pier Alden used to complain about, and the narrow stretch where the asphalt dips just enough to make your stomach shift if you're not paying attention. I knew every inch of that road. I'd driven it for decades. And yet, that morning, it felt different, as if I were returning to a place I hadn't properly seen before. Brindle House stood exactly as I left it. Weathered cedar siding, the small brass lantern by the door, the wind chime made from old boat fittings Alden had insisted on hanging, even though it sang off-key in strong wind. Nothing had changed. That was the lie. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and paused. The air smelled faintly of salt and old wood, the way it always did. My celadon teapot sat where I'd left it, The ormolu clock on the mantel ticked steadily, its rhythm calm and indifferent to everything that had shifted overnight. I set my bag down and walked straight to the kitchen. The drawer with my documents was exactly where it should be. I opened it. Neat folders, labels in my handwriting, insurance, property deeds, investments. I pulled out the one marked Land Rear Parcel. For a moment, I just held it. Then I opened it and began to read. Every line, every clause. Not because I didn't trust what I would find, but because I needed to feel the truth of it settle fully into place. The boundary agreement Alden had signed years ago was still there, a restriction tied to the freshwater spring that ran beneath the back field. No large-scale development without explicit release. No subdivision access road without environmental review. Which meant one simple thing. Without my consent, that land was useless to them. I closed the folder slowly. So that was the urgency. Not my health, not my confusion. It was timing, deals waiting, money hovering just out of reach. I let out a quiet breath and leaned against the counter. For months, small things had been happening, not dramatic enough to confront, not clear enough to accuse. My keys once turning up in the pantry instead of the hall table. My medication organizer shifted by a day. A bank notification I didn't remember triggering. Each time, I told myself the same thing. Marlo, you're tired. Marlo, you're getting older. I even apologized once. To Soraya. That thought sat heavily in my chest for a moment, then passed. I turned and walked into the living room. On the far wall hung a photograph of Alden standing beside the half-finished hull of a sailboat, sleeves rolled, smiling like he had all the time in the world. I stopped in front of it. You would have seen it sooner, I said quietly. Maybe he would have. Maybe he wouldn't. It didn't matter now. What mattered was what I did next. I moved with purpose after that. Not rushed, not frantic, just deliberate. First I made coffee, strong, black. The way Alden used to say it should wake the bones, not just the head. I poured it into a heavy mug and sat at the table with my notebook open beside me. I reread what I had written during the night. Names, dates, phrases. Capacity evaluation, temporary guardianship, Fernwick House. She won't refuse if she doesn't understand. Each line felt less like a shock now and more like evidence. I reached for my phone. For a moment I looked at Keaton's name in my contacts. My thumb hovered there just above it. Then I moved past it. Instead, I tapped another name. Petra Wexley. She answered on the third ring, her voice already alert, as if she never truly slept. Marlo? I need to see you this morning, I said. A brief pause. Is everything all right? No, I replied, calm and steady. But it will be. There was no hesitation after that. Come in, I'll clear my schedule. I ended the call and set the phone down. Next was the bank. Orson Vale had been managing my accounts for years. Careful man, detail-oriented, the kind who noticed patterns others missed. I dialed his number and waited. When he answered, I didn't waste time. I need all outgoing authorizations reviewed and temporarily suspended, I said, immediately. That got his attention. I could hear the shift in his breathing. All of them? Yes. A pause, longer this time. Is there a concern I should be aware of? There is, I said, and I'll explain it in person. For now, I want everything locked down. Understood, he replied. I'll initiate it right away. I thanked him and hung up. The last call took the longest. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I understood what it meant. Once you bring the police into something, It stops being a family matter. It becomes a record, a line that can't be easily erased. I stared out the kitchen window at the narrow stretch of land behind the house, the one they thought they could take. Then I picked up the phone again. "Marnie Quell," the voice on the other end said. "My name is Marlo Brindle," I replied, "and I believe someone is preparing to declare me unfit in order to take control of my property." Silence. Then, measured and sharp. "I'm listening." I looked down at the notebook in front of me. For the first time since the night began, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. Because now, they weren't the only ones with a plan. I didn't wait for their next move. People like Keaton and Soraya don't improvise. They follow a sequence. And if you interrupt that sequence early enough, they stumble. Not because they're weak, but because they've rehearsed everything except resistance. By noon, I was sitting across from Petra Wexley. Her office hadn't changed in years. Dark wood shelves, precise stacks of files, a faint scent of bergamot tea that never quite left the air. She didn't waste time on small talk. She never had. "Start from the beginning," she said, already reaching for a pen. So I did. Not emotionally, not dramatically. Clearly. I walked her through the night, every phrase I remembered, every detail I had written down. I slid the notebook across the desk. She read in silence, her eyes moving quickly, occasionally stopping to underline something. When she reached the line about Fernwick House, her expression shifted. "That's not care," she said quietly. "That's placement." "I know." "And this doctor, Silas Knorr, you've seen him before?" "No." She nodded once, then flipped back a few pages. "And you're certain about the notary? Drex Mallow?" "As certain as I can be from a 2 a.m. conversation." "That's enough for now," she said. Then she leaned back slightly, tapping the pen against the edge of the notebook. "Marlo, what they're describing is a coordinated attempt at financial control. Possibly coercion, possibly fraud, depending on how far they've already gone." I held her gaze. "They've started." She didn't ask how I knew. She simply accepted it. "Good," she said after a moment. That word surprised me. "Good?" I repeated. "Yes," Petra said calmly. "Because if they've started, they've left traces, and traces are what we build cases on." She turned to her computer, typing quickly. "First, we revoke every standing authorization your son might have, even informal ones. Second, we flag your property records, no transfers, no preliminary filings, nothing without direct verification." I nodded. "Third," she continued, "we document your capacity, on your terms, not theirs." I almost smiled at that. "Can they still try?" I asked. "Oh, they will," she said, "but now they'll be doing it under observation." There was something reassuring in the way she said it. Not comforting. Petra wasn't built for comfort. But precise. Controlled. She printed several documents and slid them toward me. "Read. Then sign if everything is correct." I read every line. Slowly. Deliberately. When I signed, my hand was steady. Petra watched me for a moment, then nodded. "Good. That alone undermines half their argument." "Half?" I asked. "The other half," she said, "is behavior. They'll try to provoke confusion, inconsistency. They need you to look unreliable." I thought about the misplaced keys, the shifted medication, the subtle, constant nudging. "They've been doing that already," I said. "I assumed as much." She closed the folder. "Which means we stop reacting. From this point on, you don't argue, you don't defend, and you don't explain anything to them." "What do I do?" "You let them continue," Petra said, "carefully, and we document everything." I exhaled slowly. "All right." She studied me for a moment longer. One more thing. Do you have any idea why they're in a hurry? I reached into my bag and pulled out the land folder. The back parcel, I said. There's a restriction tied to it. Without my signature, it can't be developed. Petra opened the folder, scanned the document, and her eyes sharpened. Well, she said quietly, there it is. What? Motivation. She looked up at me. Marlo, this isn't about convenience. This is about timing and money. And based on this clause, they don't have much time to act. That matched what I had heard the night before. Bluefin won't hold the offer forever. Petra closed the folder and pushed it back toward me. Then we let them think they still can. A small silence settled between us. Not uncertainty, strategy. Can you do that? She asked. I thought about Keaton standing in that kitchen, hesitating just long enough to admit he knew this was wrong, and doing it anyway. Then I thought about the way Soraya had said it. She won't refuse if she doesn't understand. I met Petra's eyes. Yes, I said. I can. And for the first time since that night, I wasn't just reacting to their plan. I was stepping directly into it. I left Petra's office with a folder in my bag and something far more valuable than that. Timing. People always think the strongest move is to strike immediately. It isn't. The strongest move is to let the other side believe nothing has changed. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the afternoon light had shifted, long shadows stretching across the backfield. I sat in the car for a moment, looking out toward the narrow strip of land that had suddenly become so important to everyone but me. Bluefin Holdings, Calder Spross. All of it built on the assumption that I would quietly step aside. I picked up my phone and checked the time. 2:17 p.m., right about when they'd expect me to be home, confused, maybe resting, maybe not remembering half of what happened the night before. Good. I stepped out of the car and walked inside. The house felt the same, but I didn't. I set my bag down, poured myself a glass of water, and deliberately left my phone on the kitchen counter where it was clearly visible. Then I opened the drawer with my documents again and left it slightly ajar. Not sloppy. Just enough. Then I waited. It didn't take long. At 2:42, my phone lit up. Keaton. I let it ring twice before answering. Hi, sweetheart, I said, keeping my voice even, a touch softer than usual. There was a brief pause on the other end, just long enough to register surprise. Mom? Hey, he said. You made it home okay? I did. Roads were clear. Good. Good. Another pause. You sounded a little off this morning, when you left. I smiled faintly. There it was. I didn't sleep very well, I said. New place. You know how it is. Yeah, he replied quickly, too quickly. Yeah, that makes sense. I walked slowly across the kitchen, letting the floor creak once under my step. Not exaggerated, just present. I might have left something there, I added casually. A folder, I can't quite remember. Silence. Then, what kind of folder? Just papers, I said lightly. Probably nothing important. I could almost hear Soraya in the background, not speaking, but listening. We can bring it by, Keaton said, or you can come over tomorrow. Soraya was actually thinking it might be a good idea to go over a few things together. Just organize stuff. Of course she was. That sounds nice, I said. Yeah? Yes, I replied. Tomorrow works. Another pause. Shorter this time. Great, he said. We'll make it easy. Nothing complicated. I almost laughed at that. Good, I said softly. I wouldn't want anything complicated. We ended the call a moment later. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the phone for a few seconds, then turned and closed the drawer with my documents. Not all the way. Just enough to keep the illusion intact. They thought I was drifting. They thought I was missing things. So I gave them exactly that. That evening, I made dinner for myself. Simple, quiet. A small pan of buttered sole, a slice of dark rye, and a spoonful of the kumquat marmalade I hadn't touched in months. The taste was sharp, almost too bright, but it grounded me. Afterward, I moved through the house slowly, not searching, observing. The back door lock, the window latches, the old cabinet where Alden used to keep tools. Nothing out of place. Not yet. But they would come. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe sooner. Because now they believed the door was open, and people who think a door is open rarely knock. Before going to bed, I took out my notebook again and added a single line beneath everything else. Agreed to meet. They believe I don't understand. I closed it, set it on the nightstand, and turned off the light. In the darkness, the house settled around me, wood shifting, wind brushing against the siding, the faint, uneven chime outside. For the first time since that night, I allowed my eyes to close without forcing them. Tomorrow, they would come with papers, with smiles, with that careful tone they use when they think they're guiding you somewhere you didn't choose. And I would be ready, not to argue, not to defend, but to let them walk exactly where they thought I couldn't see. Because now I knew something they didn't. They weren't leading me into their plan anymore. They were walking straight into mine. They arrived 10 minutes early. That told me everything I needed to know. People who come early aren't being polite. They're trying to control the pace before you're ready. I was already in the kitchen when the car pulled into the gravel. I didn't rush to the door. I wiped my hands slowly on a towel, turned off the stove, and only then walked to let them in. Keaton knocked once. Soft, careful. I opened the door. "Mom," he said, stepping forward like he might hug me, then hesitated just enough to make it awkward. "You look good." "I slept better," I replied. Soraya stood just behind him, perfect as always. Hair pinned, light beige coat, that controlled smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Marlo," she said warmly, "we didn't want to overwhelm you yesterday. Thought today we could just sit, talk through a few things calmly." "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." They walked into the house like visitors, not family. I noticed that. The way Soraya glanced around, not admiring, but measuring. The distance between walls, the light, the kind of look you give a property, not a home. We settled at the kitchen table. I had already set out 3 cups, the Celadon teapot between us, steam rising in slow, steady curls. Something about pouring tea forces people to slow down, to wait. It disrupts urgency. Soraya didn't like that. She smiled anyway. "So," she began, placing a slim leather folder on the table, "we've been thinking about how to make things easier for you." There it was. Easier. "For me?" I asked gently. "Yes," Keaton jumped in. "Just planning ahead, making sure everything's organized, in case something happens." "Something like what?" I asked. A flicker passed between them. Quick, practiced. Soraya answered. "Nothing specific, just age-related concerns, memory, stress. We all go through it." I nodded slowly, as if considering that. Then I reached for the teapot and poured. The silence stretched just long enough to make them uncomfortable. Finally, Soraya opened the folder. "These are just preliminary documents," she said, sliding the first page toward me. Medical authorization, financial access, temporary, of course, just so Keaton can step in if needed. I looked down at the paper. Top page, clean, simple. Beneath it, edges of something thicker, more permanent. I didn't touch it yet. "Do you mind if I read it?" I asked. "Of course not," she said quickly. "Take your time." I picked it up, slowly, every movement deliberate. I let my eyes move across the page, not skipping, not scanning, reading. Exactly the way Petra told me to. The room stayed quiet. I could feel them watching me, waiting for hesitation, for confusion, for a question that would prove their version of me was real. Instead, I turned the page. That's when it happened. A small shift in Soraya's posture, not visible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. But I was. She didn't expect me to go that far. Second page, limited guardianship clause. Third, conditional transfer authority. Fourth, property consent language. There it was, not even hidden particularly well, just layered. "You've been busy," I said softly. Keaton exhaled, tension slipping into his voice. "Mom, it's just paperwork. It doesn't mean anything unless I sign it," I finished. He stopped. Soraya leaned forward slightly, voice smooth again. "Marlo, this isn't about control. It's about protection. For you, for the family." I looked up at her. "Protection from what?" She didn't answer immediately, so Keaton did. "From mistakes," he said. "From things slipping through. You said yourself yesterday you forgot a folder." There it was. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Then I smiled. "Yes," I said. "I did say that." Soraya relaxed. Just a fraction. And that was exactly when I reached forward and pressed my fingertip lightly against the bottom page, right next to the signature line. A small, almost invisible crescent mark. Then I leaned back. "I think I'd like to think about this," I said. The shift was immediate. Soraya's smile tightened. Keaton's jaw flexed. "It's really better to handle it while we're all here," he said. "Just get it done." "I'm sure it is," I replied calmly. "But I've always preferred to understand what I'm signing." "You do understand," Soraya said, just a shade sharper now. I met her eyes. "Then it won't hurt to wait a day." Silence. This time, heavier, more dangerous. Keaton stood up suddenly, pacing once behind his chair. "Mom, we're trying to help you. Why are you making this difficult?" There it was again. Difficult. I folded my hands on the table. "Sit down, Keaton." He froze. Not because I raised my voice, because I didn't. Slowly, he sat. Soraya watched me now with something new in her expression. Not confidence, calculation. "Of course," she said after a moment, voice carefully neutral. "Take your time. We just want what's best for you." I nodded. "I know." And I meant it, because now I knew exactly what best meant to them. They gathered the papers, slower this time, more cautious. At the door, Keaton paused. "Tomorrow?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "We'll see." They left without another word. I closed the door and stood there for a moment, listening to the car pull away. Then I walked back to the kitchen, picked up my phone, and took a clear photo of the spot where I had marked the page. Proof it had been in my hands. Before anything changed. Before anything appeared. I sent it to Petra. Then I opened my notebook and added another line. They pushed for immediate signature. Became tense when I read full document. I closed it. Set it down. And for the first time since this began, I allowed myself something small. Not relief. Not yet. But certainty. They were getting impatient. And impatient people make mistakes. They didn't wait a full day. That told me they were closer to losing control than they wanted to admit. The call came at 8:11 the next morning. Soraya. I let it ring once before answering. Marlo, she said, voice already in that polished, professional tone. Not family, strategy. We were thinking it might be better to finalize things today. Keaton spoke with Dr. Noor, and he has an opening this afternoon. Of course he did. I'm not sure I feel up to that, I replied, letting a hint of hesitation slip in. A beat, then softer, almost concerned. That's exactly why we should go. Just a simple evaluation. Nothing invasive, it'll put everything to rest. No, it wouldn't. It would start everything. I'll think about it, I said. We really shouldn't delay, she pressed gently. These things, they escalate if we ignore them. I almost admired that line. Carefully chosen. Just enough urgency to sound responsible, just enough pressure to sound reasonable. I said I'll think about it, I repeated. Silence. Then, all right. We'll come by in an hour. She hung up before I could respond. I stared at the phone for a moment, then smiled faintly. They were skipping steps now. That meant they were worried. I didn't call Petra right away. Instead, I did something else. I went out back. The morning air was cold, sharp with salt. The field stretched out behind Brindle House, uneven grass bending slightly in the wind. It didn't look like much to anyone else, just land. To Alden, it had been everything. I walked slowly across it, stopping near the old marker stone by the edge of the spring line. The ground there always felt different, softer underfoot, like it held something alive beneath it. This was what they were trying to take. Not just money, not just control. This. I stood there for a long moment, then turned and went back inside. Now I called Petra. They've accelerated, I said as soon as she answered. Doctor today, no notice. Good, she replied immediately. I paused. Good? I asked again. Yes, she said. That means they're making mistakes. Listen carefully. If they try to take you anywhere, you do not go alone. You delay. You agree without committing, and you keep everything verbal. They're coming here in an hour. Even better, she said. I'll make a call. To who? You'll see. She hung up. That was Petra. No explanations. Just movement. I had just enough time to prepare. Not physically, mentally. I made tea again. Same routine, same cups, same calm surface. I opened my notebook and reread everything, not because I needed to remember, but because I needed to stay grounded in what was real, not what they would try to make real. At 9:02, their car pulled in. Faster this time, more direct. I opened the door before they knocked. Keaton looked strained. Soraya looked focused. No small talk. We should go, she said immediately. Dr. Noor cleared his schedule. I'm not dressed, I replied calmly. That's fine, she said. It's informal. Then it can wait, I said. A flicker. Just a second. Then Keaton stepped in. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. There it was again. Harder. I stepped aside and let them in. Tea? I offered. No, Soraya said. Yes, Keaton said at the same time. They looked at each other. That tiny crack again. I turned without reacting and poured anyway. Silence filled the kitchen. He sat. She didn't. Marlo, Soraya said, tone tightening. We're trying to help you avoid a situation that could get complicated. I handed Keaton his cup. Then I looked at her. It already is, I said. Another silence. He stared at the table. She watched me, measuring again, recalculating. You're forgetting things, she said finally. Important things. Am I? I asked. Yes, she said firmly. And if we don't address it now, it becomes a legal issue. There it was. Not concern, leverage. I took a slow sip of tea. Then perhaps we should involve someone legal, I said. Keaton's head snapped up. Soraya didn't move. But something in her eyes changed, sharp, alert. That's not necessary, she said quickly. I think it is, I replied. And right on cue. There was a knock at the door, not soft, not hesitant, precise, measured. I didn't look at them. I just set my cup down and walked to the door. When I opened it, Petra Wexley stood there, and just behind her, Detective Marnie Quell. I stepped aside. Perfect timing, I said calmly. Then I turned back toward my son and his wife. You were saying? Petra didn't step inside immediately. She stood there just long enough for the moment to settle, for Keaton and Soraya to understand that whatever version of reality they were about to present had just acquired witnesses. Marlowe, Petra said calmly, as if we were meeting for a scheduled appointment. You asked me to come. I did, I replied, and I thought it might be helpful if we all spoke together. Detective Marnie Quell gave a short, neutral nod as she entered behind Petra, her eyes already scanning the room. Not suspicious, not aggressive, just attentive. That was enough. Soraya recovered first. Of course she did. Her smile returned, smoother this time but tighter around the edges. I'm not sure I understand why this is necessary, she said. We're just discussing family matters. Then there's no harm in having clarity, Petra replied, setting her folder on the table with quiet precision. Keaton hadn't moved. He was still sitting where I'd left him, one hand wrapped around the teacup, the other pressed flat against the table like he needed something solid to hold on to. Marnie Quell, the detective said, not loudly, but clearly enough. I'm here because Mrs. Brindle expressed concern about potential coercion related to financial and medical decisions. There it was. Not accusation, not yet. But the word hung in the air like something heavier than all of us. Coercion. Keaton finally looked up. That's ridiculous, he said quickly. No one's coercing anyone. We're trying to help my mother. Then we should all be able to discuss that openly, Petra said. Soraya stepped forward slightly. With respect, this is a private matter. There's no need to escalate it into something legal. It already is legal, Petra replied without raising her voice. You introduced medical evaluations, capacity assessments, and legal documents. That makes it more than private. Silence. I remained where I was, standing near the counter, hands resting lightly against the surface. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend. I let them speak. That was the point. Soraya shifted her attention to me, her tone softening again. Marlowe, if this is about confusion or stress, we can handle it without involving outsiders. Outsiders. Interesting word. I don't feel confused, I said. Keaton stood up then, more abruptly than he intended. Mom, please, this is getting out of hand. No, I replied quietly. It's getting clear. That stopped him. Petra opened her folder. Let's keep this simple, she said. Yesterday, you presented Mrs. Brindle with documents involving financial access and guardianship, correct? Soraya hesitated, just a fraction too long. They were preliminary, she said. Of course, Petra replied. And did you explain the full scope of those documents before asking for a signature? They were going to be reviewed together, Soraya said smoothly. Today? Petra asked. Another pause. Yes. Petra nodded once, then glanced at me. That was my cue. I stepped forward and picked up my notebook from the table. "I listened to you both for 2 hours," I said. The room went still. Keaton's face changed first. Confusion, then realization. "What?" he said. "2 nights ago," I continued calmly, "around 2 in the morning, kitchen. You discussed Dr. Silas Knorr, Fernwick House, Drex Mallow, and a development deal tied to my land. Soraya didn't move. That was her tell. When she lost control, she went perfectly still. That's not," Keaton started. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I wrote it down," I said, lifting the notebook slightly. "Word for word." Marnie Quell's attention sharpened immediately. "Do you still have those notes?" she asked. "Yes." Petra extended her hand. I passed the notebook to her. Soraya's composure cracked. Not visibly, not to anyone who wasn't watching closely. But I saw it. A tightening at the corner of her mouth. A shift in her shoulders. She hadn't planned for this. None of it. Keaton looked between us, his breathing uneven now, even. "Mom, you're taking this out of context. You heard part of a conversation." "I heard enough," I said. Petra flipped through the pages briefly, then closed the notebook. "That will be useful," she said. Soraya exhaled slowly, then straightened. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Less warmth, more steel. "If you're implying anything illegal," she said, "you should be very careful." "I agree," Petra replied. "That's why we're documenting everything." That was the moment it shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but decisively. The balance of control they thought they had was gone. Keaton ran a hand through his hair, pacing once, then stopping. "This is insane," he muttered. "We were trying to help." "No," I said quietly. "You were trying to replace me." He froze. Soraya turned to him sharply, a flash of irritation breaking through. There it was, the crack widening. Marnie Quell stepped forward, just slightly. Not threatening, just present. "At this point," she said, "I'd recommend that any further discussions about Mrs. Brindle's finances or medical decisions happen through legal representation." "That's not necessary," Soraya said immediately. "It is now," Petra replied. Silence again. Heavier this time. Final. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and for the first time since this began, I didn't see confusion or hesitation. I saw calculation and something else beneath it. Fear. Good. Because now he understood something he hadn't before. This wasn't a quiet conversation in a kitchen anymore. This was a record, and everything he said next would matter. No one raised their voice after that. That's how you know something has truly shifted, when people stop trying to win the moment and start trying to survive it. Keaton was the first to break eye contact. He turned away from me, pacing once toward the window, then back again, like he needed movement to think. "This is getting twisted," he said finally, quieter now. "You're making it sound like we were plotting something." "You were," Petra said. Simple. Flat. No emotion. That hit harder than anything I could have said. Soraya stepped in before he could respond. "We're done here," she said, gathering the folder from the table in one smooth motion. "This has clearly become adversarial, and that's not productive." "Adversarial?" I repeated softly. She looked at me, and for the first time since I'd known her, she didn't bother softening her expression. "Yes," she said, "because instead of addressing concerns, you've chosen to escalate them." I tilted my head slightly. "Concerns about what exactly?" Another pause. Not hesitation this time. "Calculation. That you're not as stable as you think you are," she said. There it was, not implied, not suggested, Stated. The room went still again. Keaton looked at her sharply. Soraya, but she didn't stop. You forgot your own documents yesterday, she continued. You've misplaced medication. You've been inconsistent. Each word placed carefully, like stepping stones. I almost admired the structure of it. Petra didn't interrupt. Marnie didn't either. They let it happen. Because now, Soraya was building her case out loud. I see, I said calmly. Then I walked to the counter, picked up my phone, and unlocked it. Would you like to see something? I asked. She didn't answer, but Keaton did. What? I turned the screen toward them. The photo. Clear, focused. The bottom page of their document and right next to the signature line. My mark. That was taken yesterday, I said, after you left. Keaton frowned, stepping closer. What is that supposed to... It means, Petra said, stepping in smoothly, that Mrs. Brindle handled and reviewed that document in full, carefully, consciously. Soraya didn't react immediately, but her fingers tightened slightly around the folder. That proves nothing, she said. It proves awareness, Petra replied, which is the opposite of what you're implying. Silence. Keaton looked between us again, slower this time. Trying to catch up, trying to understand where the ground had shifted. This is insane, he said again, but there was less certainty in it now. More strain, more doubt. Good. Because doubt cracks faster than confidence. Marnie stepped forward just enough to enter the center of the space. I'm going to be very clear, she said. If there's any attempt to misrepresent Mrs. Brindle's mental capacity for the purpose of gaining control over her finances or property, that becomes a serious legal issue. Not loud, not aggressive, but final. Soraya let out a slow breath. Then she did something interesting. She smiled again. But this time, it didn't hide anything. Of course, she said. No one is doing that. Good, Petra replied. Then we won't have any problems moving forward through proper legal channels. Another pause. Longer. Heavier. Keaton finally spoke again, but his voice had changed. Less force. More uncertainty. Mom, what do you want? He asked. Not what do you agree with. Not what do you think. What do you want? That was new. I looked at him for a moment. Really looked, and I realized something. For the first time since this started, he didn't know. Not what I would say. Not what I would do. Not what came next. I want time, I said. Simple. Clean. No more documents, no more doctors, no more conversations like this without Petra present. He nodded slowly, almost automatically. Soraya didn't. She was already recalculating, already adjusting. I could see it. The way her eyes moved, not between people, but between options. Then she reached for her coat. Fine, she said. We'll do it your way. Not agreement, not acceptance, just delay. And delay, in situations like this, means retreat. They moved toward the door without another word. Keaton paused once, like he wanted to say something else, then didn't. The door closed behind them. The sound echoed through the house, sharper than it should have been. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Marnie exhaled quietly. They're not done, she said. No, Petra replied. They're not. I set my phone down on the table. I know, I said. And I did. Because people like Soraya don't abandon plans. They revise them. And now, they had a new problem. They couldn't make me look confused anymore. So the next step would have to be something else. Something riskier. I looked down at my notebook, then added a new line. Shift observed. Direct accusation attempted. Failed. I closed it. And for the first time, I felt it clearly. Not just control, not just strategy, momentum. Because now they weren't ahead of me anymore. They were reacting. And that meant one thing. They were going to make a mistake. 3 days passed. No calls, no messages, no checking in. Silence like that isn't peace. It's pressure building. I didn't waste those days waiting. Petra moved fast, faster than I expected. By the second morning, every formal channel was locked down. Property records flagged, financial access restricted, a formal notice sent to Dr. Silas Knorr requesting written disclosure of any prior communication regarding my evaluation. He hadn't responded. That alone said enough. Marnie, on the other hand, did something quieter. She asked me for a timeline, every detail, not just what I heard, but when things started changing. So I gave it to her. The keys, the medication, the password reset, the jokes about confusion, the accidental comments in front of others. She didn't interrupt, just wrote. At the end, she closed her notebook and said one sentence. They were building a pattern, not reacting, building. That's when I understood something I hadn't fully let myself admit before. This didn't start that night. That night was just when I finally heard it. On the 4th day, they made their move, not toward me, around me. It was Orson from the bank who called first. "Marlowe," he said, voice tighter than usual. "I thought you should know. There was an inquiry this morning regarding your accounts." "Inquiry?" I asked. "Yes." "Not a transaction, a verification attempt. Someone tried to confirm whether a previous authorization was still active." "Who?" I asked. A pause. Then, "It came through a third-party office, legal adjacent, name attached, Drex Mallow." I closed my eyes for a second. So he was real, and he was already in motion. "Was anything released?" I asked. "No," Orson said immediately. "Everything is flagged exactly as you requested, but they're testing the perimeter." Of course they were. "Thank you," I said. As soon as I hung up, I called Petra. "They're moving externally," I said. "Using Drex." "Good," she replied. I exhaled sharply. "You keep saying that." "Because it is," she said. "It means they're getting desperate enough to leave tracks." And we let them. That afternoon, I received a message, not from Keaton, not from Soraya, from an unknown number. "We need to resolve this before it becomes unpleasant." No name, no signature. Just that. I stared at it for a moment. Then I smiled. Because subtle threats only work when the person receiving them still doubts what's happening. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded it to Petra, and 10 minutes later, she called me. "They've crossed the line," she said. "Explain." That message, combined with the financial inquiry, gives us leverage, but I want more. More? "Yes," she said. "I want them on record, in a controlled setting." I leaned back in my chair. "You want them to talk again." "I want them to commit," she corrected. There's a difference. The setup came together quickly, too quickly for them to suspect it. Petra arranged a resolution meeting. Neutral ground. Professional setting. Not my house. Not theirs. An office space rented under Bluefen Holdings. Through Calder Spross. That was the hook. If Soraya and Keaton still believed they could salvage the deal. They would come. And they did. The building used to be a cranberry packing facility, long converted into glass offices and polished concrete floors. Too clean, too empty. The kind of place that echoes even when people speak quietly. I arrived first. Petra was already there, so was Marnie. But not in the room, not yet. Everything about it was intentional. When Keaton and Soraya walked in, they didn't expect resistance. They expected negotiation. That was their mistake. Soraya noticed the layout immediately: the long glass table, the documents neatly arranged, the absence of casual comfort. This wasn't a family conversation. This was something else. "Marlo," she said, careful again. Controlled. "I'm glad you agreed to talk." "I didn't agree," I said calmly. "I decided." That landed. Keaton shifted slightly beside her. "What is this?" he asked. Petra answered before I could. "This," she said, "is an opportunity for clarity." Soraya's eyes moved to her, then back to me, then to the documents on the table. And for the first time, she hesitated, just a fraction, but enough, because she recognized something. This wasn't their plan anymore. And right here, at this table, they were about to find out how much I actually understood. Right now, she's sitting across from the people who tried to erase her life, with paperwork, witnesses, and the truth on her side. Tell me honestly, would you stay calm like Marlo, or would you break right there? Me? I wouldn't sign a single page, not even by accident. Keaton didn't sit down right away. He stood there for a second too long, looking at the table like it might explain something to him if he stared hard enough. Soraya sat first. That was her instinct. Control the space, even if she didn't control the situation. Keaton followed. Slowly. "What exactly are we doing here?" he asked, trying to sound steady. Petra didn't answer immediately. She opened the folder in front of her and aligned the pages with precise, almost surgical movements. Then she looked up. "We're documenting intent," she said. That word landed harder than anything before. Intent. Not misunderstanding, not confusion. Intent. Soraya leaned back slightly, crossing one leg over the other. Composed again, but tighter now, like something underneath was starting to strain. "You're turning this into something it isn't," she said. "We came here to resolve things, not whatever this is." "No," I said calmly. "You came here to finish what you started." Silence. Keaton's jaw tightened. "Mom?" "Don't," I said quietly. He stopped. Not because I raised my voice, because he recognized the tone. I'd only used it a few times in his life, and never lightly. Petra slid a document across the table. "Let's start simple," she said. "This is a copy of the authorization packet you presented 2 days ago." Soraya didn't touch it. "I'm familiar with it," she said. "I'm sure you are," Petra replied. "What I'd like you to do is explain it. Out loud." Another pause. Smaller, sharper. "It's standard," Soraya said. "Temporary support measures." "For what condition?" Petra interrupted. Soraya's eyes flicked to her, then back to me. "Cognitive decline," she said. There it was again. Out loud, clear. Keaton shifted in his chair. "We were being cautious." "Based on what?" Petra asked. No answer. So I spoke. "Based on misplaced keys?" I said. "Or medication that was moved after I set it out?" Keaton looked at me sharply. Soraya didn't. She held her ground. "That's not what this is about," she said. "No?" I asked. "No," she replied. "This is about long-term stability, about making sure things don't fall apart when you can't manage them anymore." I leaned forward slightly. "And when exactly did you decide I couldn't manage them?" That did it. A crack. Small, but real. Keaton looked between us again, breathing uneven now. "This isn't fair," he said. "You're twisting everything." "No," Petra said. "She's asking you to explain your position." Marnie stepped into the room then. No rush, no drama, just presence. And that changed everything. Keaton saw her and froze. Soraya didn't move, but her eyes sharpened again. Now they understood. This wasn't a conversation anymore. This was a line. Marnie placed a slim folder on the table. "We've had some external activity," she said. "Financial verification attempts through a third-party contact. Drex Mallow." Keaton's head snapped toward Soraya. That was instinct, not strategy. Good. Because instinct is harder to control. "I don't know anything about that," he said quickly. Soraya didn't look at him. Interesting. "Drex handles paperwork," she said evenly. "That's all." "Without authorization?" Marnie asked. "He was checking status," she replied. "Of accounts you don't have access to," Petra added. Silence again. Heavier now, because now it wasn't just what they planned, it was what they had already started. I watched them both carefully. Keaton, unraveling. Soraya, holding. Barely. "Marlowe," she said finally, turning back to me, voice quieter now, more controlled than ever. "This doesn't have to go this way." That sentence again. A different version of the same idea. I tilted my head slightly. "Which way?" I asked. She held my gaze. "This one," she said. I let the silence stretch. Then I spoke. "The one where I understand exactly what you were doing?" I said. "Or the one where I sign something and disappear quietly?" Keaton flinched. Actually flinched. That was new. "I would never," he started. "You would," I said. Not loud, not emotional. Certain. And that's what broke him. "I didn't think it would go this far," he snapped, voice cracking for the first time. "It was just supposed to make things easier." "For who?" I asked. He stopped. Because there was no good answer. Soraya closed her eyes for half a second. That was the first real slip. Then she opened them again. Cold. Precise. "Enough," she said. She stood. Slowly. Deliberately. "If this is how you want to proceed," she continued, "then we'll proceed properly." Petra didn't react. Marnie didn't either. But I did. I leaned back in my chair and looked at her. "That's exactly what I want," I said. Another silence. Final this time. Because now there was nothing left to negotiate. Only consequences. Keaton sat there, staring at the table like he might find a way out written somewhere between the lines. He wouldn't. Soraya picked up her bag. "We're done here," she said. "No," Petra replied calmly. She slid one last document across the table. "You're just getting started." For a second, no one moved. Not Keaton, not Soraya, not even Petra. Because everyone at that table understood one thing at the same time. This wasn't reversible anymore. "What is that?" Soraya asked, her voice flat now, all warmth stripped out. Petra didn't look at her. She looked at me. "This," she said, "is a formal notice of investigation support and preservation of evidence." Keaton blinked. "What does that even mean?" "It means," Marnie answered calmly, "that from this moment forward, any attempt to alter documents, access accounts, or influence testimony can be treated as obstruction." That word hit harder than the last. Obstruction. Keaton leaned back in his chair like something physical had pushed him. "I didn't do anything," he said, quieter now. I didn't actually do anything." I watched him, and for a brief moment, I saw my son. Not the man sitting across from me. Not the one who whispered in the dark about moving me out of my own life. But the boy who used to stand in the doorway with dirt on his hands, asking if I was mad before I even said a word. That moment passed. Because this wasn't about what he used to be. It was about what he chose to become. You started something, I said quietly. That's enough. He didn't answer, because he knew it was true. Soraya, however, didn't hesitate. She picked up the document Petra had slid across and scanned it quickly, her eyes moving faster than before, not reading, calculating. You don't have a case, she said. Petra folded her hands. We have a pattern, a witness statement, recorded intent, and external activity attempting to validate unauthorized access. That's not a crime, Soraya replied sharply. Not yet, Marnie said. But you're very close. Silence again. This time, heavier than anything before. Because now. They weren't defending a plan. They were staring at consequences. Soraya set the paper down slowly. Then she did something I almost respected. She stopped pretending. No one was going to hurt you, she said, looking directly at me. Not soft, not kind, just direct. You were going to be taken care of, she continued, properly, safely, without the risk of everything falling apart. By removing me from it, I said. Yes. Keaton turned to her. Soraya. But she kept going. Do you even understand what you're sitting on? She said, her voice tightening now, just slightly. That land, that deal, it would have secured everything. For all of us. For you, I said. For the family, she snapped. I shook my head. No, I said quietly. You don't get to use that word anymore. That landed, harder than anything else I'd said. Keaton closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. What happens now? He asked. That question mattered, because it wasn't defiance. It wasn't strategy. It was uncertainty. Real uncertainty. Petra answered. Now, she said, everything moves through legal channels. Any prior documents you attempted to prepare are invalid without consent. Any further contact regarding financial or medical authority goes through my office. And if we don't agree? Soraya asked. Marnie stepped forward slightly. You don't have to agree, she said. You just have to be very careful what you do next. Another silence. Final. Because now, there was nothing left to test. No more pressure to apply. No more angles to try. The room had closed. Keaton stood up slowly. Not angry. Not loud. Just tired. He looked at me. Really looked this time. I didn't think you'd... He stopped, searching for the words. Understand? I finished. He nodded. And there it was. The truth he couldn't avoid anymore. I stood as well. Not to match him. Not to confront him. Just to end it. You should go, I said. No anger. No bitterness. Just done. Soraya didn't argue. That surprised me. She picked up her bag, straightened her coat, and walked toward the door without another word. Keaton hesitated, just for a second, then followed. The door closed behind them. No slam. No final statement, just the quiet sound of something ending. The room felt different after they left. Lighter, but not empty. Petra gathered the documents methodically. Marnie closed her folder. It won't be immediate, Marnie said, but this will move forward. I know, I replied. Petra looked at me for a moment. You handled that well, she said. I almost smiled. Not because I needed the approval, but because I understood what she meant. I didn't break. I didn't react. I didn't give them what they expected. And that was the only reason I was still standing in control of my life. Later that evening, back at Brindle House, I stood in the doorway of the back room Alden used to use as a workshop. The tools were still there. The smell of wood, oil, and time. I walked inside slowly, running my hand along the old workbench. This room had been quiet for years, unused, waiting. A lot like me, I realized. I looked around once more, then nodded to myself. Not an ending, a shift. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't holding things together for someone else. I was deciding what stayed and what didn't. And tomorrow, I would start with this room. The next morning, I woke up before the light reached the windows. Not because I had to, because my body no longer felt like it was waiting for something to happen. For years, mornings had started with a quiet kind of tension, checking messages, anticipating requests, preparing for problems that weren't mine, but had somehow become my responsibility. That morning, there was none of that. Just silence. Real silence. I made coffee and didn't rush it. The kettle clicked softly, steam rising slow and steady, filling the kitchen with that familiar warmth. I stood there a little longer than necessary, hands resting on the counter, letting the quiet settle into something solid. Not empty. Owned. Brindle House felt different now. Not because anything had changed physically, but because I had. I carried my mug into the back room. Alden's workshop. It hadn't been touched in years. Tools lined the walls exactly where he left them, worn handles smoothed by time. The old workbench still carried faint marks from projects I could no longer name. There was even a small wooden box in the corner I hadn't opened since the winter after he passed. I set the mug down and walked further in. Dust, yes. Time? Yes. But not neglect. Waiting. That's what it felt like. I opened the window. Cold air slipped inside, cutting through the stillness, bringing in the smell of salt and wet grass from the field. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing it in. Then I moved. Not fast, not dramatic. I picked up one tool, then another. Set them down properly. Cleared a section of the table. Wiped away a thin layer of dust with an old cloth I found folded beneath the bench. Small things, but deliberate, because this space wasn't going to sit unused anymore. Neither was I. By midday, Petra called. "It's moving forward," she said. "There will be formal steps, statements. Possibly charges depending on how far it goes." I listened, calmly. "And Keaton?" I asked. A brief pause. "He's cooperating," she said. "We're trying to." That didn't surprise me. "And Soraya?" Another pause. "She's not." That didn't surprise me either. "All right," I said. Petra hesitated just slightly. "Marlo, if you want to reconsider anything, any part of this, now is the time." I looked around the workshop. At the space. At the life that had almost been taken from me without a single raised voice. "No," I said, and I meant it. Later that afternoon, Neve came by. She didn't knock the way she used to, quick, uncertain. This time it was steady. When I opened the door, she didn't say anything at first. She just stepped forward and hugged me, tightly. I let her. "You okay?" she asked after a moment. "Yes," I said. And that answer felt different now. True in a way it hadn't been before. We sat in the kitchen for a while. No heavy conversations. No sides chosen out loud. Just tea. Quiet questions. Small moments of normal that hadn't existed in weeks. At some point, she noticed the open door to the back room. "You're using it again?" she asked. "I am." She smiled slightly. "Grandpa would have liked that." I nodded. "I think so, too." That evening, after she left, I went back out there. The light was lower now, stretching long shadows across the floor. I turned on the old lamp Alden used to work under. It flickered once, then steadied. I placed my notebook on the table, opened it, and for a moment, I just looked at everything I had written over the past days. Plans, words, evidence, the quiet record of a life almost rewritten by someone else. Then I turned to a clean page and wrote one final line. I heard them, I understood, and I chose myself. I closed the notebook, not as an ending, but as a decision. I'll say this honestly. If I were in Marlowe's place, I wouldn't scream or chase them. I'd do exactly what she did. Protect everything quietly, let the truth surface, and never hand my life over just to keep peace. If this story hit you, subscribe, like, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if you heard that conversation at 2 a.m.?